Well, hello. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar on navigating the process of an IET request application. My name is Vanessa Alvarez, and I'm an instructional resource with Collier Adult Education, and I work primarily with online and IET programs. So whether you've submitted IETs for approval before and need a refresher or update, or if you've never submitted an IET before, I'm excited to share about the IET request application process today. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat by letting us know where you're joining us from today. It's always nice to know who's here with us and try to make it as interactive as we can. And while you do that, I will tell you a little more about my background. So again, my name is Vanessa Alvarez, and I'm an instructional resource for Collier Adult Education. And I work a lot with our IET programs. I have some recent experience with submitting an IET request application myself on the IPDAE portal. So this webinar is kind of like what I wish that I had at that time. I've also included my email so that if you want to know more about anything you see today, or if you want to know more about my own personal experience, you're welcome to email me. And so I'll put that in the chat as well. And hey, thanks, Wade. Nice to see you. And I'll put this again in the chat at the end of the webinar in case anyone has any further questions they want to follow up with. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for putting in the chat. So before we begin, please remember to use the Q&A for questions, as all attendees' microphones will be muted and in listen-only mode. We know that there will be questions along the way, so feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section as we go. And then finally, today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the IPDAE website within 48 hours for you to reference in the future. Hey, Megan. All right. So today we're going to be looking at three main topics so that you will be prepared to successfully submit your own IET request application. We're going to talk about what information you need to know before you even start, like important submission dates, things like that. And then the bulk of our time will be on preparing for and gathering your information. And then we're going to walk through what it looks like to submit the request. Okay, so let's take a look at what you need to know before you even start gathering your information. So these will be the questions I'll be answering about what you need to know before you start. So you'll need to know, what is an IET request application and where can it be found? When can these be submitted? And do the single set of learning objectives for your IET already exist on IPDAE? That's a big help. So first, we need to know what even is an IET request application. So if it's been a long time since you applied to get an IET approved, or if you've never done one before, this is an important place to start. Basically, if you want to teach an IET, it must first be approved by the state. So it's been formalized into an IET request application, and that's now housed on the IPDAE website. So you can see under the IET section, this is where it's located. The whole rest of the presentation today will be what this IET request application is like. So if you didn't see this announcement earlier this year, just know that your IET must now be submitted at specific times during the year. So in the past, it was kind of more of a rolling deadline. And so now we have two windows to submit the IET request applications. We have March 1st through 31st. And then we have December 1st through 31st. So since March has already passed, our next window of opportunity will be December. So that means you cannot start a new IET in August if you have not already submitted your IET and had it approved. But on the positive side, that gives us all the way from now until December to plan ahead for any new IETs that we want to implement. So I'm hoping that this webinar will be helpful to you so that you can plan ahead for that process, making December a little less stressful. And just know that a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today is when I had access to the IET request application in March. So there will be updates between now and December. So you can look forward to probably an updated webinar in the fall with those updates. So we'll try to provide as much information as we can for now, but just know that there will be some little changes here and there. Hi, Rocio, and hi, Marian. So first, has a single set of learning objectives already exist for your program? So what do I mean by this? So in December, there were people across the state working under ACE and committees to complete several programs' single set of learning objectives. These have already been approved as SSLOs, and they exist on the IET request application, or they will. So when you get to that part of the IET request application, just know that you will be able to view what's available and select it. So I'll be talking more about this in depth later. I just want to give you a heads up, again, before you even start preparing, that some single set of learning objectives like HVAC, manufacturing, I think it was CNA, internet business, and I think we had Microsoft Office, they already exist. So these SSLOs are single set of learning objectives that you have to put into your IET request application. They might already exist and you don't have to start from scratch. Okay, so we'll talk more about that as we go on. So if you do end up wanting to do, for example, HVAC, and like I said, that one already exists as an SSLO. If you do select that, I forgot to mention that this is an example of what the single set of learning objectives will look like. So it's basically a read only. So you can make the judgment on whether it's going to serve your IET's needs. If you choose it, it will automatically embed into your application. An alternative is if you want to copy the text from the screen and then use it as a starting point to write your own custom single set of learning objectives, or SSLOs, that would also work. But ultimately, you will need to select other and then paste in the SSLOs that you customized. Again, we'll go more in depth on this, but this is something to be aware of before we start. Nothing like doing all the SSLOs from scratch, only to find out that there are pre-approved ones that you can adopt. So hopefully this is going to be helpful to you in the future. So now, what if you're submitting something that doesn't already have an SSLO? Then you'll be clicking Other, and then you're going to be supplying your own SSLOs. Okay, so we'll talk about that when we get to that point. All right, here we go. So the next thing is going to be the bulk of today's webinar, and that's going to be on everything you need to gather and prepare before you start your IET request application. So this is the organizing, the planning, the bulk of what you're going to need to do between now and December. So we're going to be following the exact IET request application as it was in March. Remember that you won't be able to go in and see it yourself right now, because right now it's not open on IPDAE, it's not our window. But I have screenshots of each step of the process. So you'll get a preview of what everything looks like so you can better plan. So basically my format is I'm going to briefly talk about these things and then show you what it looks like on the screenshots. All right, so on step one, step one is the first part of your IET request application. So in step one, you're going to need to know what are you going to name your IET program name, a detailed description, and then your funding source. For the sake of time, I won't be able to get into exactly what goes into the detailed description, but in the screenshot, I'll show you how you can find what information should go in there. For the funding source, just know that if you are going to have IELCE funds, it must be for an ESOL program. So IELCE, ESOL. If you have funds from corrections or AGE, however, it can be for APE, ESOL, ASB, GED, AHS. So just be sure that this aligns. And then also each funding stream requires its own application. So for example, if you're using funding from HE, you select HE. If you plan on using IELCE in addition, then that's a separate application. And feel free to put questions as we go. I'm happy to pause and look at those. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the actual IET request application. You can see the IET program name, And I'm going to use our Intro to Drafting and Design IET as an example throughout this presentation, just so you can get an idea. Obviously, you don't want to write blah, blah, blah on your program description. You will want to, I think it's either click or hover on these little tooltips. So that's this little eye here. And when you do that, it will tell you exactly what they're looking for in the program description. So again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can always look at here. For a funding source, you can see that you first have to select the funding source from a drop-down menu. So HE, IE, LCE, corrections. And then you select the program type from there. So I selected AGE, and then my program type is ABE, and then ASB. I'm going to include both of those in that funding source in this IET. Just an example. Yours might look totally different. So next, we're still on step 1. We need to supply the anticipated number of students we expect to have in the IET program. Not the whole year, but how many students do you anticipate having that first day of class? And then you're going to need to know the career cluster. I'm going to show that in the screenshot so that we have a better idea of what that looks like. And then for how the class will be structured, you'll need to think about your instructional model. Do you have one instructor? Do you have two? The duration of the class, how long will each IET class last? Whether it is part-time, full-time, and then whether it is online/virtual, in person, or is it a hybrid of the two? And then finally, you'll need to be able to not only answer if you have industry partners, but be ready to name them. So let me show you so this makes more sense. So you can see here that we have the anticipated number of students served. Since I had chosen AGE for my example program, that is why it's asking me for a breakdown of ABE and ASB students. So just for the sake of simplicity and being realistic about numbers in a new IET, I put 5 and 5 for my first group of students. You can see that for career cluster, it is a drop-down menu for you to choose from. For drafting, it would be architecture and construction. If you were doing one for Parapro, it would be education and training and so forth. So for instructional model, we, as in the program that I work with, Collier Adult Ed, we, in this case, are going with a one instructor model. So I selected that one from a drop-down menu. If you were working with a technical college, you might have a 2 instructor model, one for the CTE side of things, and then one for the adult ed or literacy side of things. So in fact, our CNA program is a two instructor model. So in that case, if I were doing CNA, I would change this from 1 to 2 in the drop-down menu. And then I'm saying that our time commitment or the duration will be 11 to 15 weeks. And the reason I'm saying that is because we have a couple different schedules that change the number of weeks a little bit, but this is also from a drop-down menu. So you'll have different options. So we know this is going to be a part-time program and that it will be, I think ours is about 150 hours in a semester. And then our delivery method in this case will be face-to-face. If you have an online or a hybrid program, you would select that there. Okay. And then finally, yes, we have industry partners. So first I select yes, I have industry partners, and then I have to be ready to list each of our partners. So for example, if you're partnering with a technical college, you could write the name of the college here. So we're partnering with Lorenzo Walker Technical College. I can then add another partner here on this button. And then I can add like an employer, for example. So for example, in my CNA program or our CNA program, we have the college, Lorenzo Walker Technical College, and then I could add another partner and add our employers like Naples Comprehensive Health, Vetus, and so forth. Okay, I'm seeing a couple of things come in, so I'm just pausing to look at questions real quick. Yeah, there's a question about OCP, and so Kathy just wants you to know if you reach out to Kathy O'Neill, she'll be able to answer that question for you. And then if any of these pieces change, do we have to inform anyone? That's a good question, Jane. That will be one that I'll probably ask Kathy about. From my experience, if it's something small, I don't think we have to change the whole application, resubmit the whole thing. I think only if it really changes the nature of the IET. Any other questions? Okay, yes. So we don't have to submit every time there's a little change. Kathy would be overwhelmed with applications. Okay, and then there's another good question. Where can existing approved SSLOs be accessed during the period of time the application is closed? So your own, if you submitted one, would be under your portal. I can't remember exactly what the page looks like, but I know that I went into mine and I was able to see the one that I submitted still now. But for other people, I think there's the IET program catalog. And that's where you can see what all has been approved out there on the IPDAE page. Great. Okay. All right, I will carry on for now, but you can keep putting those questions in there as they come up. Okay, so now we get to move on to step 2, which is measurable skill gains and certifications. Sometimes this is an easy one, like with a nursing assistant class, knowing that your students will take the CNA test at the end. And then other times it's not so easy. So like, for example, my team, we're kind of struggling right now with finding the right certification for our intro to manufacturing class. But if you know you're going to be offering a certification, be ready to know where this is coming from. So for example, can it be found on the master credential list or the Perkins list? Or does it come from somewhere else, which is going to be called other on the IET request application? And by the way, if you want links to these, like the master credential list, the Perkins, Florida Ready to Work, they're going to be on the PowerPoint handout, which will be the same place that you'll find this recording. So in about 48 hours or less, the recording will be on the IPDAE page and then also this PowerPoint, and then you can access all the links there. Okay, so next you need to consider what MSGs or measurable skill gains your students might earn in your IET. And then finally, will you use Ready to Work to have your students earn credentials? This is also linked in my presentation, so if you will want to find out more about Florida Ready to Work and what it has to offer. Okay, so let's take a look at what it looks like in the application. So here we are. You can see that for my IET, I know that, yes, they're going to work on the AutoCAD certified user. So first I select, yes, I have a certification. And I know that this is approved on the master credential list. So I selected the master credential list. It looks like you can select more than one here, which I didn't do in this case. But if you know your certification is on both the MCL and Perkins list, it looks like you can select both. And then if I were talking about our intro to manufacturing class, on the other hand, for now, I would have said OSHA 10, which isn't on the MCL or Perkins list. It's a credential of value that employers will value, or that they would often need to take in a technical program, but it's not on those other lists. So I would have to say other certification. So you can also see here that once you select either your MCL or your Perkins one, that it's going to create a drop-down menu. And then I was able to find our AutoCAD certified user certification from there. Hopefully, of course, you'll do the work ahead of time to make sure that you have looked for your credentials on the MCL or the Perkins list. But that's a nice little cheat sheet here on the request application. And then you can also see that I get to select the MSGs that would work for my program. So since we're a standalone program, we're not a pre-apprenticeship, we're not tied directly to the technical college in this IET. So for us, our best MSGs for us will be 1 and 5. So you would select the ones that best reflect your program. There was a good question about, is there any benefit to adding Florida Ready to Work credentials besides the benefit for the student? I don't think it changes anything as far as, you know, your credibility of the IET, but it, of course, is good for adding to the benefit of the student. And if anyone from IPDAE or Kathy has more to add to that, feel free. All right, and then so that brings us to right here. If you are going to be using Florida Ready to Work, then you would select this. In my case, we didn't. We're not currently using it in the IET, so I put NA, and it does not affect how you're going to be approved or not for the program. Okay, so now we get to move on to step 3, program enrollment. You'll need to be able to say whether your program will have participants enrolled with CTE, pre-apprenticeship, or adult ed only. So how are you enrolling your participants? So with Intro to Healthcare, for example, which is our IET that usually comes before our CNA class, our students might become, they might be just from adult ed only. If you were in a CNA or nursing assistant, ours is adult ed only, but a lot of them are also attached to the CTE side of the house. So it just kind of depends on your program. And then what occupations could this lead to? You should have an idea of that. So Intro to Healthcare, for example, that would be our students might become caregivers, but eventually we want them to maybe go on to the CNA class. So I could add nursing assistant or phlebotomist. You don't have to add every possible job, just what seems to fit most directly, and a couple is fine. And then does this IET lead to another IET? So again, that Intro to Healthcare class, that usually for us leads to a CNA. But our Intro to Drafting, in our case, it leads to a CTE program or employment, but it doesn't lead to another IET. So this is what it looks like on the application. This one is pretty simple. Please note that you can add more than one occupation to the list. So for example, for our Intro to Drafting, I put drafter. But if I wanted to add other occupations, then I would just click and add another occupation, and then I would list them there. You notice that I selected no for leading to a new IET or another IET, and I selected my adult education only. Okay. Perfect. There's a couple questions that I'm going to defer to others for now, but if they want, I think Kathy's weighing in on a couple of them. All right, so here we are, step 4, which is the last but biggest step, the program of study. So I like to call this the big stuff because this is where the most thought and planning tends to go and probably should go. So this is the meat of the IET class, and what goes here should reflect directly to your program goals and purpose. So here are some planning questions that we want to ask ourselves. What workforce training or career and technical education standards will be used? So although this won't be asked directly on the IET request application, you will need to be looking at the CTE frameworks and using them to plan your IET. So this is going to make a little more sense when we get to the single set of learning objectives, but also just keep in mind, like if we don't know this side of the house, how do we know how to prepare our students, right? So you can find the CTE frameworks on the Florida DOE website, but you should also be consulting your colleagues from the CTE side of the house. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then what employability skills for workforce preparation will be taught? This is going to end up being a checklist on the IET request application, but of course you should be checking this against the employability frameworks too. And then what adult education standards will be used? You're going to get this from the Florida DOE website as well, the adult ed frameworks. And then you're going to be copying and pasting just the standard codes that you are going to be using, and I'll illustrate that in a moment. You're not going to put the whole verbiage of what the entire standard says for each standard. And then do the single set of learning objectives already exist for this IET program? So remember, we talked a little bit about this in the beginning of the webinar, and if they don't already exist, I'm going to be showing you a great planning document that you can use to help you create them. So don't worry if they're not already created for you. Okay, so for your workforce preparation activities, you can see that this is lovely. It's already out there for you. You get to read through these and say, yes, 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 whichever ones you know you're going to be covering in your IET program. And hopefully most of these will be selected. I read through all of these and I knew that they would be covered in our Intro to Drafting program, so I selected all of them. And then here you can see that for standards, here it is, you only need to copy paste the codes. This is what I mean by that. So just put in the RLA L3V12, not the whole verbiage of what that standard means or stands for. So I don't need to write each one out. And then the big stuff, for the single set of learning objectives, I'm going to show you a planning template that was used in creating the approved SSLOs that were created in December with ACE. This planning document is going to help you plan your own SSLOs, and you don't have to use this exact document. It's just an illustration of how it will help you plan. And this is, again, if your SSLOs don't already exist, you don't need to start from scratch. And this is a slightly older screenshot, so you don't see that drop-down menu here, but it will be here in December when you open the new request application. So if yours doesn't already exist, before you input all your SSLOs, you'll want to make sure that if you really thought and planned them out, and then you'll select other, and then you're going to be putting in your SSLOs. So let's take a look at that planning template. I'm going to just pause for just a second while I pull that up. And by the way, this planning document, you can get it a few different ways. It's not posted currently, but if you want to email me, you can email IPDAE, you can email Kathy. One of us will get you this template. Okay, so since this document isn't actually turned in, so this is not going to be turned in with your IET request application, you don't have to fill out all of this, right? This is just for you to plan, but you can if you want to. If you want to have everything organized into one place before you start to submit your application. And if, again, if you want your own version of this, you can just email us. So these yellow rows here that say learning objective, that is where your single set of learning objectives are going to be created, but that's not going to be your first step. So how do you create them? You're going to take your CTE frameworks that you want to focus on, and you're going to put them under the workforce training content and objectives column. So you can see from this planning template that you could have 20 or more to put here. But you should probably plan to have at least 8 to 10, and you do not have to fill out this entire thing with SSLOs. You're going to know your IET program the best. What's the purpose? What's the duration? What should students definitely know by the end from a CTE standpoint? So this is when it would be a really good time to meet with your colleagues from the CTE side of the house and plan with them. Look at the frameworks together. They're going to be your experts here, and they're going to know what's needed and what's realistic in the time frame that you have. So just real quick, I'm going to show you the drafting frameworks that I'm going to use here, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit to make it easier. So this is a drafting frameworks, and I'm going to look at these introductory type ones for my introduction to drafting class. Okay, so whether or not you're planning with your CTE colleagues, you want to be referencing the CTE frameworks. They're available on the Florida DOE website. So let me show you the one that I'm using. So in my drafting CTE frameworks, I may want to be sure that we work on demonstrate algebra, mathematics knowledge, and skills related to drafting. I'm not really a math person, but this sounds like this would be something that would be covered in Intro to Drafting. So great, I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to paste it into my planning document. So now I have my first CTE framework that I know that I want to work on. So I like to do all the CTE frameworks first, and then I like to fill in my adult ed frameworks. And that's going to go in this next column for basic skills, content, and objectives. You don't have to have a reading, language arts, and math objective for everything, but you should have at least a couple for each CTE framework. So let's look at the adult ed frameworks. I'm going to get more into it. I'm going to use the math one since we're talking about algebra. So again, this will be on the Florida DOE website. I'm going to use math in this case to support the adult ed side of the house. And so it may not apply to reading in this case. It'll certainly apply to math. And then it might also apply to language, but just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to do one for now. So I like this one. This one is write and solve two-step equations in one variable within a mathematical or real-world context where all terms are rational numbers. Again, not a math person, but I feel like this fits. And I had a little help from a more mathy friend to help me with this. So I'm going to take that one. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it into my planning document under math, content, and objectives. Okay, so of course I can add another one more specifically about algebra if this is just an example. So there you go, I copied that in there. So now to create my single set objective here, I'm going to marry the CTE framework with at least one of my adult ed standards. So if I have several adult ed standards here, just pick one or two to marry to your CTE frameworks. You're going to try to put these two together to create one learning objectives. You can do this all yourself, but I like to use a little AI to help me. So let me just quickly demonstrate. This is ChatGPT, our good friend, who sometimes helps us cut down the amount of time that it takes to do these things. So I'm going to be typing or copying and pasting in this case. I'm going to tell ChatGPT to create one learning objective for adult ed standards that combines the career tech standard with this adult ed standard. So then I put my two standards in here. And then I'm just going to say, let's see what ChatGPT gives me. Okay, so here is what ChatGPT comes up with. Let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit there. Students will apply algebraic skills by writing and solving two-step equations with rational numbers to calculate dimensions, angles, or material quantities and drafting scenarios, demonstrating an understanding of how algebra supports technical design solutions. That saves me a whole lot of time. Now, hopefully, we're being purposeful, thoughtful, and we're thinking about whether or not this is actually going to fit for your IET. Does this make the most sense, or do we need to edit it or tell ChatGPT something different? But for the sake of time and demonstration, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put it here, my first learning objective. And voila. So now I have my first single set of learning objectives right here. So again, hopefully when you do your own with your you're consulting with your CTE folks, not just blindly copying and pasting like I just did. But I'm going to continue this process until I have all my SSLOs. So again, I'll go back to my CTE frameworks, pick what I think is going to be necessary and doable in my time frame for my IET. I'm going to keep going. And then I'm going to look for the adult ed standards that fit. Or if we're doing IELCE, ESOL, this, okay, what standards fit? And then I'm going to marry the two together. I can do that all by myself, or I can get a little help from ChatGPT. Okay, so when I have all of my single set of learning objectives, so pretend that this whole document is full of SSLOs. Okay, I can now go back into my PowerPoint. So let me get there. And then I can paste these into my single set of learning objectives. So I would copy and I would paste into here. So now that you have done all the gathering and preparation, let's talk about how to submit the actual IET request application. So remember, we're outside the window. It's not going to be live right now. But when it comes time, you're going to go to the IPDAE website and you're going to navigate to the IET Assistance Center, which you'll find under IETs. So you can see here at the bottom right, there's a button for IET request application. You can click Get Started, but remember, you won't actually be able to view or submit anything until those two windows. So March 1st through 31st, and then December 1st through 31st. Once you do click to get started, you'll do the whole process that I just showed you from step 1 to step 4. You will have your information saved after each step. So you don't have to worry about, getting to step 3, having to go and you lose everything. But if you're in the middle of step 4 and you haven't finished and you need to leave, it will get you to the beginning of step 4 again. So it's best to have all your information at once for each step of the way. And then after you complete step 1, you're going to hit continue and it'll save that information that you have for step 1 and so forth. And then once you submit everything that we talked about today in your IET request application, you're going to get this lovely, friendly message letting you know that it's been submitted and that you're going to have some sort of answer within 2 weeks. And don't fret if you are told that you need to review or edit something. I also had to review and edit a couple things, and that's okay. That's normal. So you're going to receive feedback and you're going to have the opportunity to edit your application accordingly. So once everything is satisfied, you'll be notified that your IET has been approved. Hooray! And that's it. So you're now able to proceed with putting your grand plan into action, and you can start that IET process. Awesome. All right, so I know that this is like so much information, but remember that this is being recorded. It will be on the IPDAE website soon, and the PowerPoint will also be on the IPDAE website. So if there were links in here that you want to reference, then feel free to do that. And again, remember that you can email me at any time. I'll put that in the chat again at the end. So take your time with this process, and it's better to get started sooner rather than later, or you'll find yourself a little frantic around December or March. We've all been there at some point in time. And remember that you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Kathy or IPDAE if you have questions about this process that I was not able to answer today. And I have done this process once with the IET request application. I was on one of the committees that met with ACE in December when we planned some of the SSLOs that are now approved. So I'm not an expert, and I'm not an administrator either. But I can provide my own experience and like what worked for me and what made my process a little bit easier. So there's one more question in there, and I think someone is answering that from IPDAE right now. So your answer is coming in just a moment. All right, so let me just one last thing, put my information in the chat one more time. Here it is. And then Ariel, I just saw your stuff in the chat. Yes. So Ariel, good point. And thank you for slowing me down too. So if you're going to be submitting a new IET request, is it recommended that I first explore what IETs in the state of Florida have already been approved so that I don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but instead build on what was done by others? So yes, we are encouraged to do that quite a bit. And we have worked with plenty of other programs, and they've worked with us, and we take things from each other in a positive way, and we're able to adapt and adopt. And why reinvent the wheel when someone else is already doing it? So reach out to your neighbors across the state and never hesitate to see what other things are going on out there. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so this is bringing us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining me. And before we go, please be sure to give IPDAE your feedback. And while you're giving IPDAE your feedback, just keep in mind that we have another webinar coming up, Tech Tuesday, and it's going to be called High Quality with Low Tech Tools in an Educational Setting. That will be Tuesday, April 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can register for that on the IPDAE website. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and would love to hear from some of you in the future. Thank you.